that when she'd seen him at Thanksgiving, she'd allowed herself to be the convenience she didn't want to be. But no more. She gave him an arch look. So it was a great weekend. You still can't argue it was more than a hookup. I walked away from that without knowing when, or if, I'd see you again. He frowned at her.
That's absurd. You're our attorney. Of course you'd see me again.
Was he being purposely obnoxious? He put his hands on his hips.
I suppose you're going to tell me Thanksgiving was just a hookup, too? I brought you dinner.
After they'd flirted all day at a winery event they'd just happened to meet at. She'd accepted his sister Tori's invitation to attend without realizing Liam would be there. Wait, had he known? Did you know I would be at the winery that day? He arched a brow.
Who do you think suggested we invite you?
Damn it, she didn't want to know that. Now you tell me, she muttered. He flashed her a grin.
Am I wearing you down?
She thought of what had happened next, after yet another spectacular night together. She tightened her arms across her chest. No. Do you remember what we did after that night? She watched his expression go from thoughtful to confused to blank. That's right. Absolutely nothing. You went back to Denver without a word. He winced.
Hey, I tried to see you at Christmas, but you weren't here.
Because she'd gone out of town with her aunt and uncle, the better to avoid Liam. With every hookup, she'd fallen a little more under the spell of their attraction while he'd seemed impervious. She hadn't wanted to lose her heart. She still didn't.
And I actually did try to ask you out for New Year's, but you wouldn't return my texts. When you did text me back, after the New Year, I might add, you said you didn't want to see me anymore.
Oh, she'd wanted to see him, but she couldn't. Not on the terms he'd expected. He couldn't even call her. She was willing to bet her house that asking her out wouldn't have involved actually going out. I lost interest.
You're lying.
She pretended to stifle a yawn. Admit it, the sex wasn't that great. If she'd been Pinocchio, her nose would have stretched to Hawaii. His gaze dipped over her body appreciatively.
Well, now I have to call bullshit, he said softly. I think your pants are definitely on fire.
Knock it off. He inched closer.
What? Can I help it if we set off enough sparks to start a conflagration? It's been like that since the start. You remember that, right?
How could she forget? That first time had been nothing short of explosive. He'd come to see her after she'd read the details of Alex Archer's trust to his family. As Alex's identical twin brother, Liam perhaps felt his suicide the most keenly. He was definitely the most pissed off, and he'd directed that anger at her. 14 months ago, he'd stalked into her office, his eyes blazing. She'd been weary and overwhelmed by trying to rein in her own crippling grief while she'd visited the Archers just days after Alex's death. Alone in her office, she'd needed, to open the emotional floodgates.
What the hell kind of attorney are you? Liam had thundered. What sort of hourly rate do you charge to help a guy off himself? Do you have a special package for that?
His words had socked her in the gut. Hard. Tears had risen fast and bitter, and her breath had gone immediately shallow. Get out, she'd rasped. He'd advanced on her until only her desk had separated them.
Why didn't you tell any of us? Why would you let my family, my parents, for fuck's sake? Why would you let them go through this?
She'd wiped her hand over her eyes and gladly welcomed fury to replace her agonizing sadness. You think I knew what he was doing? She'd glared at him, glad to have someone to unleash her own frustration on. You think I somehow helped him? He told me he was preparing for the worst-case scenario, that his lung issues would likely send him to an early grave. I had no idea he intended to kill himself. He'd sneered at her, his face so familiar because it was the image of Alex, the man she'd come to know and like so much over the past year.
You're a fool, then.
Screw you, she'd spat, and get out of my office. He'd yelled something else at her, something she didn't remember, because at that moment she'd realized he was crying. She'd never seen tears of anger. She'd reached out to touch his face, and everything had changed. He pulled her against him and kissed her. Moments later, they'd cleared her desktop and had torn at each other's clothes.
You're overthinking,
he said, drawing her back to the here and now. She was back in his parents' sitting room instead of her dim office.